That's being done, let me read our text for today, Galatians, the third chapter. I'm going to read verses 26 through 29. Galatians, the third chapter, verse 26 through 29. This is a passage probably familiar to each and every one of us. If not, will be after I get through reading it. For you're all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither bond nor free, there's neither male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. And if you be Christ, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. You know, you read that text and you think about what do you learn? What does that tell you? Well, you might automatically go over, well, it's about baptism. Well, it is. It's about blessings in Christ. It is. But you know one thing that stands out to me? God doesn't care. No, He cares about you and I. That's obvious. John 3:16, what's called the golden text of the Bible. God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son. You can't care any more than that. But we need to realize there are things that this world cares so much about. It seems to just pattern everything in their life. And God in this text says, I don't care about that. You think about the things that make the world go round and whether they should be of the utmost importance. There are things we should care about in the sense that we do all we can as children of God, but are they the focus? In that sense, God says, I don't care. For example, you look at that in verse 28. He says there is neither Jew nor Greek. God does not care about my or your race or heritage. Now, whenever you talk about race in the Bible, you got a problem because God doesn't talk about race the way the world does. There is the human race. He doesn't talk about the color of people's skins. But there was a great divide in the first century. It existed all through history and goes on till now. But here it's described as there is neither Jew nor Greek. That was the division that God looked at and saw when He looked in this world. Whenever Abraham was called, God had created this world in the goal, eternal goal, of bringing about a people for Himself. Now, mankind sinned, God prepared the world, and ultimately in the book of Genesis, the 11th and 12th chapter, Abraham is called. And he says, in his seed shall all nations be blessed. Nations, not races, they're nations. And so through Abraham, he selected the seed through which the Lord Himself would come. The Galatian writer talks about the time that in the fullness of time, Christ came forth, born of a woman, made under the law. The Old Testament now is done away. In the Ephesian letter, he talks about there was a middle wall of partition between those nations again, between Jew and Gentile. Or as he puts it here, Jew and Greek. But Christ, when He died, He took that away. And so God looks today, and you've got to wonder, what does God think? Whenever we are just so much on my heritage, my race, my people, and God says, I don't care. Whenever I get my way, whenever Christ is followed, there is no more Jew nor Greek. That explains a lot about what's going on in the world. It's the world. They live in darkness. They seek after their own. God says, I never have and never will be a part of such things as that. So He looks here and He says, there is neither Jew nor Greek. He says, Jack, I don't care. You know, I can go down I can go just down the road here to one of the premier genealogy sites in this world. And I can do all of the searching, and I can show you what my heritage is. I can show you the bloodline that I have, and I can make all the charts. There's nothing wrong if you want to do that. If you want to find out all that stuff, go ahead. But if that is what the impetus of your life is, if that's what Jack Williams looks and says, do you know who I am because of this? Do you know who I am because of my skin color? Do you know who I am because of the country I came from? God looks and he says, I don't care. Why do we? The Apostle Paul in the Philippian letter, in chapter 3, he talks about such things. You see, the Apostle Paul, notice it in chapter 3 and verse 4 and following. He says, now I might have confidence in the flesh. If any other man thinketh he hath whereof he can trust in the flesh, I more. I was circumcised the 8th day. I was a stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. Whenever Paul began truly following God, you know what he thought about that? That's dung. Dung is the excrement you clean up whenever it is around. He said, that's what I counted. He said that by inspiration. What do you think God's estimation is whenever I, because of who I am, where I'm from, the color of my skin, my genealogy, think who I am? He says, I don't care. But also, you read on, he says there's neither bond nor free. Now, in this world, what makes the world go round? Money. You know, I want to be in power. I'm going to be the boss. Well, good for you. You know, Christians ought to strive to be the best they can be. And if you succeed as a Christian, great, that's good. But if I begin to boast and say, do you know who I am? You know, it can happen in the church. You saw it in the first century with the Jews. You know, the Pharisees stood up. I'm going to do everything to be seen. Well, that's the pride. And God says, you know, people trust in that. You can be the boss. You can have the riches. You can have all of these things. The Apostle Paul, again, in the Philippian letter, in chapter 4, and, you know, he had the pathway to greatness as far as heritage, his race. He was the Hebrew nation, the Israel. That would have been the way to prosperity, to being the one in charge. Philippians, the 4th chapter, and verse 10, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at the last your care is flourished again whereof you had careful, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I was speaking in respect of want. Here's this man who had everything, but whenever he gave that up, he gave up the riches of this world, a position that other people sought for. And he says, I've learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know how to be abased. I know how to abound. In everywhere, in all things, I'm instructed to be full, to be hungry, abound, suffer need. I can do all things through Christ. So I stand up and I say, do you know who I am? I have built this company from the ground up. I am the CEO. I have this. I have this belonging. I have these things. God looks and he says, I don't care. He wants us to use it properly if we do. If you're blessed with that, if you have as a Christian labored, great. Glorify God. Whether you eat, drink, whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. People say, well, in this world, there's still such a thing as servitude. And it's been throughout the world. The Apostle Paul deals with it in the book of Philemon. Here was a runaway slave. And whenever Paul deals with this man, he teaches him, encourages him, he strengthens, he becomes a child of God. So he sends him back to his master, and he tells him now, you take him back in verse 16, more than a servant, above a servant, as a brother. Now he did not say, you cannot have servants anymore. But if you read that text, if you live as a Christian, what's going to happen to the type of servitude he was under? Treat him as a brother. He may still be a servant, but he is a brother. Over in the book of 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter, in verse 22, the Apostle Paul dealt with those who would become Christians. There were a lot of questions in the first century church. And as Christianity grew, as the principles and character of Christianity grew, it took care of a lot of the social ills. You can mandate certain things. You can make a law about certain things. But unless you change the heart, John in the book of Revelation, he's been looking at the 7 churches of Asia. There was the church who did things, but he says, return to your first love. You see, if you don't do it out of a love, out of a motivation of heart, you're going to be that lukewarm Christian that he talked about in Laodicea. But you look in the Corinthian letter, and he says here, they had questions about what happened when you become a Christian. In verse 22, he that is called in the Lord being a servant is the Lord's free man. Likewise also that he is called being free, he is Christ's servant. So he says, there are things in this world that are wrong. Christian principles will do away with that. You cannot have slavery and Christian principles coexist. They've got to be disregarded. But there is the idea of a servant, of a bondservant and such. That still exists, and rightfully so. You're under a contract to a person, so to speak. But God says just because you become a Christian doesn't change cultural things there. You're called in that state. You're going to be in that state. If you're dealing with Christian, things are going to get better and they're going to get amazing. But the fact is, are you bond or free? God says, I don't care. That's not the defining thing between you and I. And then he says, neither male nor female. God doesn't care what sex I am. By the way, the world, I saw a thing the other day, this woman, and I know I'm not supposed to use the word, but it's the only word I can think of. She was a total idiot. Over 100 different genders. What? God says there's 2, male and female. But today, even in the church, you find people who are looking, we're degrading women. What do you mean? Well, God gives a role for men and a role for women in the church. I don't feel degraded because I can't be a mother or I can't do the work of women. But some men do. Let's do it where there's no gender recognition at all. God says, no, there is. But my relationship with you, male, female, I don't care. Doesn't make any difference. So quit your whining. Any of these situations you're in, live the Christian life, encourage others to live the Christian life, and these situations can be as God would desire them. But the reality is, we live in a world that doesn't care about what God says. That's why it's called ungodly. People care about all of these things. That is their focus. That's their life. And so that's what they seek after. We're going to do this because of that. What does that have to do with being a godly Christian? Besides, if you put the focus there, you're not a godly Christian anymore. Let me ask you this. If God doesn't care about these things, and I do, what does that make me? Ungodly. And that is the world we live in. And that is what slips into the church if we are not careful. We become ungodly. Whenever we look at people or we look at self and make these distinctions as that which is my goal, my focus, my hope, my desire, my defining thing in life, that isn't what defines me. I am defined by a relationship with God, and God says these aren't going to interfere with that. So I look at that, and I think about the text again. Well, what does God care about? Well, He doesn't care about my race, my heritage in this world. You know what He does care about? Galatians, the 3rd chapter. He says there in verse 26, you're children of God. Oh. He doesn't care whose child I was, whose nation I'm from in this world. He doesn't care what my race is. He doesn't care what my heritage is. He doesn't care what my claim to fame is. He says, are you my child? If you are there, these don't matter. If you're in the world, they define you. But He says you need to be different. You're my children. Well, and then He tells us how to do that. You know, you can't just stand up, well, okay, I'm going to quit, I'm going to be your child. Well, God says, okay. You're all my children through faith in Christ Jesus, for as many as have been baptized into Christ to put on Christ. In other words, if you're really going to follow me, instead of following the dictates of the world so you can have this pride that you get, this goal that you have, that's my goal, that's my hope, put me in charge. And whenever that happens, I don't have any problem with what He said. We're children of Christ, children of God by faith in Christ Jesus, for as many as have been baptized in Christ, put on Christ. People say, well, you're working your way to heaven. You know, I noticed something this morning. John was teaching class in Revelation, the 3rd chapter, and verse 20, as he's ending there, the letters to the 7 churches. He says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice, open the door, I will come in and sup with him. What do you think God is going to do? You know, say, sorry, God, I don't believe in opening doors. I don't mind hearing you, but that open door stuff, that means I got to do something. Whenever I did something as a knucklehead when I was growing up, I've mentioned this before, my father, sometimes he was speechless. He just looked at me, shook his head, and walked away. Like, you can't deal with that. Yet that's the way the world is. You see, God cares. He doesn't care about these things that the world cares about. This is their defining act of life. God says, I don't care about that. Are you my child? You see, because all of these things, they don't matter whenever you talk about the blessings that are in Christ. But here's how you become my child, so you're in Christ, so you have these blessings. And yet the world doesn't care about that. Oh, we care about Jew or Greek, bond or free, male or female. You know, that's what makes me who I... No, what makes me who I am is if I am a child of God. And there's only one way I do that. I surrender unto Him. And whenever I do, you talk about riches. Again, you go over to the book of Revelation. You look at the church at Smyrna, and he says, I know your poverty, but you're rich. Church at Laodicea, you say you're rich, But you are blind, you're wretched, you're naked. You see, whenever I become a child of God, the riches of this world, you're to provide, you're to work, you're to labor. And some people, they get more benefit in this world than others. But that's not going to define me. Because I am now a child of the King. And I have riches this world can't even conceive of. That's why, Matthew, the 6th chapter, I don't serve mammon. The mammon I do have, those things in the world, I use them to make friends of those things in heaven. But I don't serve that. I serve God. And so I have true treasure which will transcend this world and I can lay up in heaven. Because I am a child of God. And God says, that I care about. I want you to be rich, not in the way the world thinks about it. If you are rich, that's fine. Don't have the love of money. But if you get money, you use it properly as a Christian. But you need to focus on the fact that no matter what happens here, you can have the riches in heaven because you are a child of the King. And as far as my sex, what gender I am, in the book of Romans, the 8th chapter, he doesn't deal with gender. He deals with the fact that in Christ, we are heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ. You see, I've got a brother in heaven. That's really the picture you get in Romans 8. I am an heir, a joint heir with Christ. So I look at that and I need to look at this world. And I need to get disgusted with what goes on because it is ungodly. Everything that you see, this world, people clamor and bite, devour, destroy, tear down everybody. It's over things that God says, I want you to be my child. These things I don't care about. Those aren't the defining thing. Are you my child? So I look at Galatians, the 3rd chapter, and I do my best. I strive to be successful in whatever I do, and it may not bring a recompense that I desire. Maybe somebody else, me as a preacher, I can show you preachers who get a lot more money than I do. I can show you preachers who get a lot less than I do. But that's not the thing that defines me. I look and I think about my position. Do you know who I am? Boy, I've spoken here and there, and I've written this, and I've done this. Well, good. But if that's your claim to fame, you got a problem, Jack. That doesn't define me. Look, and man, I can serve as an elder, and you can't. Well, I hate to tell you this, that isn't what defines me. If I'm a servant of God, whether male or female, I have the blessings God gives, and I do the work He gives to me. Whether it's because I'm a male, whether it's because I'm older, whether it's because I'm younger, whether it's because I have a talent in this area, doesn't matter. I look, and if I am godly, I ought to be disgusted at the things that the world looks at. And I ought to be disgusted with myself if that's what defines me. Now, I can't control what goes on in this world. I sure wish I could. I'd love to wave a wand and make all the evil, ungodly things disappear. I can't do that. But what I can do is I can make the decision that I care about the things that God cares about, that I'm a child of God by faith in Christ Jesus because I've been baptized into Christ. I look at the blessings He gives me, no matter what all of these other things are, and I rejoice in that, and I let my light shine before men that they might see my good works and glorify my Father which is in heaven. Not me, but my Father which is in heaven. I go out and I preach, I teach. Why? so that they can observe all things whatsoever He has commanded, not me. Why? Because I want those people to be concerned about the same things I'm concerned about. And I need to be like Paul, keep under my body and buffet it daily. Because it's easy to fall into the trap and care about the things that God says, those aren't what define you. So who am I today? Really, it comes down, am I godly? If this is what, and if I'm wrong, you tell me. If these are the things that God says, those aren't the defining things. Those things aren't what matters. But here is what matters. You be my child, you live like my child. If I'm wrong in that, you tell me. But if I'm right, let's look at ourselves and say, am I godly or ungodly? One of the two. We look and we see what blessings there are. No matter who you are, where you came from, what you've done, doesn't matter. If you want to be a child of God, you can. And you can do it this morning as we stand and sing the song of invitation.